So first, congratulations, Jen. We are so delighted for this big day and for us to be celebrating it with you. Silver and Shadow is out in the world, written by Jennifer GRUENKE. And tonight we've got a panel of authors to help us celebrate. First off, I'd like to introduce Laura Beth Johnson, who actually helped us make this big pivot to virtual events when we launched her book, Goddess in the Machine, last summer. We are celebrating tonight of Silver and Shadow, her first book. And without further ado, I'm gonna hand the mic over to KALYN and let the show begin.
All right, awesome. Welcome everyone. We're so excited to have you here to help us celebrate the launch of Silver and Shadow. It's been a long time coming. I'm sure you feel that, Jen.
Yes, definitely.
Here. How are you feeling?
I am very excited. I'm a little bit nervous. Earlier today, I was like, oh, I'm not nervous at all. Like, it's just going to be chatting with my friends. And now I'm like,
now there's faces staring back at you.
Like, there's people here. The book is out. I have to say like intelligent things now, which has been very difficult for me as of late. So
get that. I have to put actual clothes on. Like,
I know, right?
Well, just to give everyone a heads up about how the night's gonna go, basically what we're thinking is structure-wise, we're gonna start out with some questions about the book and about Jen's writing process. And then we're gonna do some fun rapid fire questions at the end. And then to culminate, we'll end with questions from the audience. So if you guys have any, please keep them in your mind because we would love to hear from you. All right, so to get us started, Jen, Of Silver and Shadow has such a great cast of characters. I cannot tell you which one of them is my favorite because that would require me to choose. So I think it has, I don't know, it has everything, great characters, an imaginative world, cool magic. I just wanted you to tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write it.
So Of Silver and Shadow came from the very first book that I ever finished. I wrote like a bunch of, first chapters starting back from when I was in like 7th grade and horrible writing up until in my early 20s, I wrote this book that was like this sci-fi-ish, I don't even know what to call it. It was not good, but I did finish it. And I was like a little delusional when I finished it and I was like, this is great, I'm gonna get this published. And then after like a month or so of not touching it and sitting away from it, I realized that I was not going to get this book published. It was a great learning experience. I think like us writers can all agree there aren't any wasted words. You learn something from everything that you write. So it was a great experience, but it wasn't gonna go anywhere. And so I thought to myself, what would this story look like in a fantasy world instead of this sci-fi dystopian like ish world? So it was born from that. The story now has transformed so much that you would never like recognize the book, that first book in these pages now. It transformed a lot. Like some of the characters aren't even the same, but that was the initial inkling.
That's awesome. It's crazy how story can change.
I totally understand what you're saying, where how like stories just can change so much. Like you'll start in one spot and then it'll take you somewhere completely different that you weren't expecting. Mm-hmm. And the heart of the story is the same, but it's brand new. So your Silver and Shadow takes place in a city called Denfell, and it has such like a presence, like it's almost a character in of itself. So tell us a little bit about that city. Where did you draw inspiration for that? Is it based off of anything? And how did you create that world?
First of all, I love that you said it's like a character itself. It's like a huge compliment. Because one of my favorite things to do in writing is creating like an atmosphere where my goal is a reader to pick up a book and to feel like they can like walk down the streets of the city. What does it smell like? What does it sound like? What are the people wearing? That kind of thing. So I really do kind of approach it with character in mind. What does the city feel like? So Denfell originally was strongly inspired by Ketterdam. Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, which is like one of my all-time favorite books. I think a lot of us feel that way. So it was originally inspired by Ketterdam, and like the particular like grittiness of it, and it's dark and a little dilapidated, and you know, you get stabbed when you like go around a corner. But it definitely evolved from there too. And I think a lot of that was actually the characters' influences, because we have Ren, who lives in the southern part of the city, which is like the slums and where things are really difficult and it's really violent and it's really dark there. But then we have Derek on the other side, who is the rebellion's leader, and he's very, very wealthy. And he was not going to be living the same type of life and in the same, like anywhere in the same sphere as Ren. So I kind of needed to create a city with, you know, those two different aspects to it. So then it evolved to have, well, the north side of the northern part of the city above the river, because a river cuts through the middle of the city. The northern part of the city, you know, is going to be this nice city with like colorful houses and rose bushes out front, and it doesn't smell as bad. And this is where we see some of our characters. So in a way, the characters really like determined this whole city at the end of the day.
That's really cool. I like that. I definitely, I feel like when I build cities, I kind of do this thing where I'm like, I create something when I need it.
Yeah, I do the exact same thing. I do that with everything.
Yeah, exactly. So plotting or pantsing then, Jen?
Pantsing, I think that one's obvious.
I totally get that. That's awesome. I mean, like I said, the city is a huge, huge part of the book, and it definitely feels like a character of its own, which I think is even more of an accomplishment considering the cast of characters that you already have in the book. I mean, 4 point of views is no joke. I don't know how many writers we have in the audience, but I think most of us can agree that even 1 is a struggle. So 4 that both feel very different and alive and capture the reader is a really, really big accomplishment.
Thank you.
And so one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, which of these point of views was the hardest for you to write? Which one was the easiest, and why?
So Ren was the easiest for me to write. She popped into my head very fully formed. Her lines, her like, you know, little quips and stuff just kind of flowed. She was just very easy to write. I didn't really have to pull very hard at her. She just kind of like, Ren is extremely closed off on the page, but she was just like telling me everything. So there was something about her, I didn't have to try to find her voice, it was just there. And then the most difficult character to write, I think, was KALYN. I love KALYN so much. He's like the younger prince who doesn't really know his place in the world, and he's trying to find it within this his family, who's like very violent and very psychotic, and he does not fit in with his family, and he struggles with that a lot. So he's really just like trying to figure out who he is as a person. And I think that was part of the reason that he was really hard to write, because he didn't know who he was. So I was like, KALYN, you got to give me something to work with here. So there was that, and KALYN is an extremely witty character, where Ren is sarcastic and caustic and mean-spirited. KALYN is like very cheeky and very witty and like has a lot of banter, and he's much wittier than I am. So I would sometimes sit down and I would be like, KALYN would say something so funny right now, and I have no idea what it would be. So it would take me a really, really long time to find his lines sometimes. But a big part of my revisions with my editor was working on him. I think out of the 4 characters, we dove into him the most because he was the one, like I said earlier, who was like struggling to figure out who he was. So I was struggling to figure him out. So my super brilliant editor was asking me a lot of questions about him, like, well, why won't he stay in the castle? Why is he running off to the city every night? How does he feel about this? How does he feel about that? So we really dove into his character during revisions. And I love the way he turned out, but he was hard.
I totally get that. Writing characters smarter than you is probably like the biggest challenge.
I know. Like, why do you do this to yourself? I don't know.
I still can't believe that for your debut you have 4 point of views. Like that just, it just
I don't
blows
know
my
how it
mind.
happened. I really don't know how it happened. It just happened. It was never my
And-
intention. They just all showed up one day.
And they all have vastly different experiences and vastly different motivations, especially as it's tying into the central plot. So, you know, Derek is against the king, and Adley works for him, and you know, she's not loyal to anybody but herself, and then you have KALYN just kind of stuck in the middle of this. And so you have all these vastly different characters. How do you make sure that each of their storylines is compelling and relatable to the reader?
What I think what relatability comes down to is understanding. And with Ren, she was easy enough, I think, for a reader to approach her and find something relatable with her, just because, yeah, she's on her own side, but she's kind of just trying to live her life, and like she keeps getting knocked unconscious, and like she's like, oh my God, this is so annoying. I mean, I think that we can all kind of relate to that. So she is like, and Derek was kind of the same way. Derek's like the most cut and dry with his motivations. You know, his mother was killed by the king when he was really young, and his promise to her, his very last promise to her right before she died, was that he was going to carry out her revolution. And so that's like driving him the whole time. And I think that's really, you know, he's the typical like heart of gold hero type, you know, trying to overthrow a tyrannical king. So that's, you know, it's pretty easy to understand where he's coming from. I think the two that were that you have to work a little bit harder at were KALYN and especially Adley. We have Adley, who I never considered her a villain and an antagonist. She's certainly a protagonist in her own right, but she is on the opposite side of the rebellion. Her whole story is that she is a soldier for the king, and she is hunting down the rebels and torturing her way to the rebel leader, trying to find Derek. So she is an antagonist to them, but you kind of learn when you follow her storyline. And I particularly love this about her, because she should be a villain. She should be somebody that you don't root for. But she's just trying to survive. She's like she has a very soft heart. She's like softer than she should be for everything that she's been through and the position that she's been put in. And she's like, you know, in love with somebody else, but she can't be in love with them. And all she wants is to escape and like live in peace. So it's on the surface, she should be very different than she ends up being. And so you kind of just have to, and I like delve into the characters. And I think that if we're doing our jobs right as writers, when you explore their motivations, you're going to find that relatability.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have this image kind of just instilled in my mind of all the books in her room, and like how that like,
yeah, exactly,
just told me so much about the character, and in a way that was telling me she's not who you expect. And she has more depth than what you as a reader are giving to her at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, her books are super really telling. Absolutely. Like she's got them stacked just everywhere. And that's something, there's a scene in the book where Derek like runs into her randomly on the street, and he drops a book, and she tells him, hey, you dropped this, I hope. And then she said, oh, by the way, I hope you like it. It's one of my favorites. And like he stops and pauses, and he was like, she's a crazy torturer person who I absolutely despise. Like she shouldn't like books. So that kind of gives him pause as well.
I love that. You know, listening to you talk about them, I'm curious, do you have a favorite?
Okay, I was asked this question recently, and it's so hard. It's a cop-out to say I love them all for different reasons, but I really, really do. I think that my favorite, though, probably is Ren. She just has a very special part of my heart. I think just because she was like, she just came to me as a character, and like I just really understood her. And one of my favorite parts of writing this book was exploring her character. You know, she first shows up on the page and she's selfish, she's sarcastic, she's mean-spirited, she's cruel in her worst moments. She is not like a good person. But then as I was writing the story and like diving into the why of her character, it was so interesting and so wonderful to like, but awful at the same time, because she's like a deeply sad person with so much grief and so much shame over her past. And then she kind of like lashes out at the world because she's just so sad all the time. But it was really, really interesting to explore her. So she has kind of a place in my heart just for that reason.
That makes sense. Yeah. Well, just to dig in a little bit more to this point of view things, I'm fascinated by the fact that you did this. How did you decide to do 4 point of views? Were you just like, okay, I need to tell this part of the story and this part of the story, therefore I need these characters? Were they like Ren and the character came first and you're like, this person has to be there and I have to tell their story? I mean, how did you end up there?
So what you said earlier about when we were talking about the city and like you're adding things as you need them when they're just necessary to tell the story, that's what happened with all the characters. So I did not set out to write 4 points of view. I am not that masochistic. It was just that Ren was always the first, and I thought that the whole book was going to be told from Ren's point of view. I thought she was the story. And then I was writing, and I don't remember who came next, but it was either KALYN or Adley. I think it might have been Adley, because I was like, thought to myself, because I had the king's children already, and I thought to myself, what if there's another part of the story here? What if we see inside the castle and what's going on the opposite side of this revolution? Because it very easily could have been a story that was just, we meet the main characters, they're trying to overthrow the king, they work to overthrow the king, we're following this storyline. So I decided to introduce somebody who would be opposite of them, and we could see kind of this different perspective, and especially because Adley is not your typical torturer. And then KALYN, just like, KALYN won't be left out of anything, and like, you have to write him. So he just showed up and I was like, okay, I guess we're doing this. And then Derek did come last. I didn't add Derek's perspective in until probably like a third of the way into the book. I kind of realized at one point that we were missing a piece of the picture, because Derek's on the inside of the rebellion and he's leading the rebellion, and without his perspective, the story didn't feel complete. So I ended up adding him in a third of the way through, and I think that all of them are necessary to the story. I don't think the story would be what it is, and I don't think it would be a complete story without all 4 of them.
I totally agree with that. One of my favorite things about the book was that you get every side of this story. I feel like, kind of like you were saying, sometimes a lot of rebellion plot lines will follow the people trying to complete the rebellions. You know, it would have been Derek as the main character. And you don't often get, you know, somebody like Ren who's just trying to live their life and get swept up in the ramifications of everything happening. You definitely don't get the people working for the other side. So I think it was really cool to be able to see all sides of the story and just the way that they butt heads with each other, particularly Derek and Ren, which leads me to second.
Craft-wise, it's just craft-wise, it's just brilliant. I know we have a lot of writers in the audience, but if you aren't, like, writing multiple points of view is just ridiculously hard. And Jen manages it like it's just, you know, another Tuesday. Like, it's so brilliantly, you know, incorporated together. And like, when she first told me before I'd read the book that there were 4 points of view, I was like, oh no, yay. And then like, I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, like, she nailed it. She absolutely nailed how to balance all of these different storylines and weave them together in a way that just is really captivating to the reader. And also, like, there was never a character where you get to their chapters and you're like, oh, you know, all of the characters, you know, they would appear and you'd be like, oh yeah, I get to hear from them again. So just craft wise, it's just brilliant.
Totally.
That was so nice.
I think a large part of that too is that you did such a great job giving them all their own individual stories while connecting them to the larger overarching plot. You know, everyone has something that they want and are working towards, but they're all getting caught up in what's happening. And
Yeah.
I think that really made them feel all very individual and alive. That and my other favorite part, which is all of the banter. I'm a big fan of banter in any book whatsoever, and you did it fantastically in this. You created such a lifelike rapport between the different characters, and I'm just curious whether this was something you actually focused on or whether it just naturally appears in your book.
I didn't like approach the book with the idea in mind, I'm going to write so much banter right now. It wasn't like an intention of mine, but I feel the same way as you. And like, I live for banter. It's like banter that doesn't even further the plot in some books, and it's just like A+, like quips back and forth are some of my favorite scenes in other books. So I think I just naturally was going to put that in my writing because it's what I love, and like we all just need to write the things that we love. I also think it did just kind of come to me for the most part. A lot of the characters, like their relationships, kind of just the way their relationships unfolded, their like bantery quips back and forth really just kind of came out on the page. But I also think it was really necessary to make the book feel a little less heavy. This is a really dark story, and there's a lot of violence, and there's just a lot of heavy stuff. And I think without the humor and without the banter, this could easily have just been too much, and been a less fun story and a like more like overwhelming story. So I think the little bits of banter and the little bits of humor definitely lighten it up a little bit. But I will say, I was thinking about this the other day. There's like, I feel like there are two different types of like banter in the book, because we have like the typical just like friends making jests at each other, and that's kind of what KALYN does. Is like KALYN's really charming, and he's just like says these funny witty things that like you just laugh at. And then we have especially Ren and like Derek have this banter I hesitate to even call it banter because they're just like being jerks to each other. They're really mean. And then it'll like cross the point to where, and this was intentional, like it'll reach the point where Ren will say something that's like not even banter anymore. She's just lashing out. So that kind of happened a lot. It's like, there was the fun banter and the haha banter, and then there was the banter that was like them poking jabs at each other and trying to make the other person bleed, and it was less all in good fun. But it told you like a lot about the characters too. So
it can also be cathartic to write.
Yeah, for sure. I always said like Ren is kind of like my inner like mean person. Like she says things that just like, you know, the super like judgy side of yourself. I was just like, this is Ren. I'm just gonna get it all out on the page. So I think that was also why she was really easy to write, because she's got this really dry, really sarcastic sense of humor. And I guess that's what goes on in my head sometimes. So I just got to put it on the page.
I think like a lot of times writers will write characters that are like little parts of themselves, but like sometimes they'll be like wish fulfillment, like this is what I wish I was, and then we'll write characters that this is what I secretly am that nobody knows about. And that's what I love about you know, creating characters, is it's like little pieces of yourself that you've been repressing or that you didn't even know was there. So let's talk about craft a little bit. So just craft in general, as you are writing, what do you feel like are the easiest aspects of writing a book, or in particular, what were the easiest aspects of writing this book, and what was the hardest? So like characters, world, dialogue, all of these things. What was the easiest and what was the hardest?
Easiest, I think, was the characters, and particularly the character dynamics between each of them. Like I said, Ren just popped into my head. She was really easy to write. It was just, the characters was just, writing them was more just exploring things and exploring their personalities, with the exception of like KALYN and editorial notes was a little more difficult, but for the most part, they just came out on the page. And the most difficult part, not even in this book, and like everything that I write, the most difficult part is always the world building, like the outside the city, like the political ramifications of everything that's going on in other places, and like the rules to the magic system. I was just like, do I have to do this? Like, do I really need to create rules? Can we just like say the magic is pretty and that's cool? So those are things that that don't come very natural to me. I have to like really sit down and think about them. I try to skimp on them, but then somebody will always call me out on it. My agent or my editor will be like, Jen, this doesn't make any sense. And I'll be like, thought I got away with it that time. So that's always the hardest part for me.
I really like the way that you phrased that question, Laura Beth, because I think that it's interesting how different books can present different challenges. Like for some, it's like, okay, the characters are fully fleshed. I know what they want. I know who they are and what they're going to do, but I can't figure out the magic to save my life. And then vice versa. You might get a story that starts with the magic and you know everything about it, but you have absolutely no idea who exists in that world. I think it's fun to see how the challenges differ. But
Sorry, my dog is like whining in the background. She's having a fit.
Oh.
Okay, so another craft question for you. Craft is tangential. We're curious what or if there is a particular scene that you love the most.
I knew you were going to ask and I forgot to think of an answer. There is this particular scene that I love the most, but it is a bit of a spoiler, and so I don't want to say what it was, but it was a very, very emotionally charged scene that I really looked forward to writing for a long time. And so once I finally got to write it, I was like, yes, this is everything. Other than that, I can think more so of moments that I enjoyed writing. Like there are specific passages in the book that I still remember when I sat down and wrote them. There's like a moment that I really love with KALYN where he says something that he regrets immediately saying, that is just like him in his worst moment saying it. And then there's like a line of dialogue where he has this just like really sad moment where I just wanted to hug him. But that like really, really spoke to why he is the way that he is. And so there's like passages like that just kind of like these character moments that just kind of came to me and were so easy to write and gave me so much insight to who these people were.
I like that you said that, like remembering sitting down and writing those moments, because there's a good chunk of my writing that I don't remember writing. Like it just sits there and I'm like, oh, that line was pretty good. Don't remember writing it. But there are like those moments that you're like, you remember exactly where you were writing, what position you were sitting in. And like the act of writing is just as memorable as what you're writing. And I think it's interesting that you pointed that out.
Yeah, like those eureka moments.
So what's your writing process like?
So I very much I think it's because I'm a little impatient. Once I think of an idea, I'm like, okay, I got to write this now. Like, I don't want to plot this out. That's the boring stuff. Like, I'm just going to write this. So I think of an idea. I do generally have an ending in mind just because I'll come up with an idea and then I'll be like, okay, what would this look like as a story? And so I'll kind of know how it's going to end when I sit down to write, but I usually just start going and kind of following my whims. I will say that this has bit me in the butt every single time because I will make it 10,000 words, 15,000 words in, and I'll have written everything wrong and I'll have to start over. And I'll do that 3 times. With Of Silver and Shadow, it was it was a totally different story in the beginning. I was trying to force Ren to be this character who she absolutely wasn't. So I got really far into that and then scrapped it all and started over and like made her a different character, put her in a different like part of her life and like all this stuff. Like Derek, when he first started, was like a conglomeration of him and his brother, and like I split the two of them and then like gave them their own thing. So I will have to start over, but so then I pants it without a plot, without anything in mind, just like following my whims up until probably like 3/4 of the way through, maybe not that far, but I will hit a point where I'll get stuck and I won't be able to keep writing until I know how it ends, because I've like laid so much groundwork and weaved so many threads in that I have to start tying them up at this point, and I need to know how I'm going to tie them up. So I will sit down and plot out chapter by chapter the rest of the book. But that's not until the end. So I consider myself a pantser, but I suppose I start plotting. I'm like a plantser. Like at one point I'll start plotting, but I avoid it until I have to.
But having written with you, I feel like you are the most intentional pantser I've ever written with. Like you're like you said, you write very clean drafts, and you're very intentional. Like, so, you know, you've written a scene and I've rewritten the wrong book 3 times by the time you've got like this perfect scene, because you're very intentional. Like you don't waste your energy writing extra. You write the things that are going to have the strongest impact. So. Yeah,
I am a very slow writer, because I get caught up in the details and like intentional writer. So, okay, I'll change that wording from now on. I'm an intentional writer. Thank you.
All right. So I have one more kind of fun question for you before we jump into the rapid fire questions. We want to leave about 15-20 minutes for audience questions. So if anyone has anything they want to ask, Ada, I believe they want to drop the questions in the chat. Correct me if I'm wrong, but and then we will go through. Awesome. Yeah. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat while we're going through the last of this here, and then we'll get to them soon. Okay, so last fun question for you before we get to the rapid fire is, you have such a really great Instagram presence. If you guys haven't checked out her account, it's incredible. Everything is beautiful. So I wanted to know, if each of your characters had an Instagram account, what type of photos would they post?
Okay, I love this question so much. So let's start with the easy one. Adley would be a bookstagrammer. Like, she would 100% be a bookstagrammer, and she would be a fantastic bookstagrammer. She could like bookstagram with the best of them. Okay, so for KALYN, there's like a little bit of a backstory here. So like a week ago, I fell down this like weird Instagram rabbit hole where I found this guy who he runs this urban farm, and he like posts the most chaotic but like charming and wholesome and just like these addicting videos of his urban farm where he's being chased by an ostrich and he's like being like, the duck doesn't pay rent. And then there's these birds and they're all named Julie. And like he has a pet possum. I don't know. It's like so crazy. And I could not stop watching. And I was just like, I love this man so much. So KALYN would have an Instagram like that. He'd have like 1 million followers who would just like watch him running around, like being chaotic and charming, but a little less wholesome. And then Ren would have like a fabulous like fashion Instagram. She would like post all of these photos of her like fabulous like grungy type of like outfits and all the new clothes, like kind of a street style Instagram. But in every single picture, she'd look like pissed off at the world, and like the last thing that she wants to be doing is posting this Instagram photo. But that's what people would love her for. She'd be like the ultimate like cool girl who doesn't give a crap with like fabulous clothes. Derek would not have an Instagram. Absolutely not. He would not have one. But he would like occasionally pop up in like the background of KALYN's videos, like looking really grumpy and really moody. And then everybody would like, when everybody would see him, they'd be like, who's that cute guy with the man bun in the back of your video? And then KALYN would always hashtag the videos that Derek was in, hashtag Derek doesn't have an Instagram.
The thoroughness of those answers make me so happy.
I thought a lot about this.
It's very important. I mean, like, when you're trying to figure out your characters, why not figure out what they would post on Instagram?
Figure out what they post on Instagram, figure out what they wear, that kind of stuff.
That's important. Okay, so we're gonna jump into some rapid fire questions, just some fun ones to get to know Jen a little bit. So your first one is favorite man bun.
Okay, so he doesn't have a man bun right now, but he did at one point, so Harry Styles.
Ah, okay. All right, this is a great war between me and you, but tea or coffee?
Coffee. Tea is for the weak, KALYN.
What, Jen? All right, morning or night writing?
Night, though I'm kind of trying to turn myself into a morning writer just because of work, and it's like easier to be less exhausted, but I'm a night owl. I hate the mornings, so far it's not really working.
Yeah, I feel like the pandemic's kind of crashed into that, like when you can write and stuff, and
so
crashed into
night.
everything else. All right, hardcovers or paperbacks?
Paperbacks.
Fair. Favorite trope?
Hate to love, or like / enemies to lover. I cannot get enough of that. Like, I can't stand you, but there is so much sexual tension, and like I can't wait for these two to kiss at some point, and it's going to be a really angry kiss. Oh, so satisfying.
I never would have guessed from your book. Weird.
I know. Who would have known? Who would have seen that one coming?
All right, what are you currently reading?
Joke's on you. This is not a rapid fire question because I'm reading 4 books, but I'll make it quick. I'm reading The Bone Houses. I'm reading The Final Empire, Dating-ish, and Tiny Beautiful Things, which is like an advice column, like book about like life and love and everything in between.
Dang, that's a lot.
I don't know how it happened. I just like picked one up after the other, and I was like, now I'm reading 4 books and I don't know what's happening.
All right, and last one, top book recommendation right now.
I think The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I read it by V.E. Schwab. I read it last year and it like changed me. I cried for 50 pages straight. I've never cried so much in a book. Like, oh, I love that book so much. It might be like my new favorite book.
Like happy crying or like sad crying?
I mean, I don't want to spoil it. I just got very, very emotional. Like, I cry when I'm happy and when I'm sad. So I'll just like leave it at that. I got so emotional during that book. It just deeply moved me.
It does have a lot of emotions in it. I totally get it. Okay, awesome. Well, then we're going to move over to audience questions. Starting with, what kind of research did you do while you were writing?
Research was kind of the same as adding characters and world in by necessity. I would just write until I reached a point where I needed to do some research because I didn't know what was going to happen at this point. I think I would like Adley's an archer. So I, when I was trying to figure out how far she would reasonably be able to shoot an arrow, I like looked into like the distance, like the maximum distance of archery. And of course, Adley can shoot an arrow as far as like it is physically possible to shoot an arrow because she's that good. So I made, that the threshold. And things like that. I can't remember, like, I don't really remember anything big because it was just all these like little things. Every time I came across something I didn't know, open the internet and search at that point.
I'm also team research as you go along.
Yeah, when you need to know something, like suddenly they're on a ship and you need to know how ships work.
Yeah, like what's the name of that thing? I guess I should find out now.
The internet searches of a writer are an interesting place.
Mm-hmm. I searched winter fruits at one point, and that came shortly after, like, how long can somebody survive once they've been like stabbed with an arrow? And then it was winter fruits.
Keeping it interesting. All right, what part of Silver and Shadow came to you first, such as a character, a scene, a concept?
The very basic concept came to me first, that based off of the first book that I wrote, and then saying, what would happen in a fantasy world. And then but shortly after that, it was definitely Ren as a character. I didn't have much beyond the concept and like kind of like, yeah, the concept, honestly, that's all I had. And then I started writing Ren, and she very much informed the story because it was going to be like extremely different than it ended up being before her. So she changed the course of the entire thing once I started writing her.
Sounds about right.
She's
Ren
the
would
architect.
totally be like, this is my book now.
Yeah, she was like, no, I don't think so. I don't think so, Jen. You think you know, but you don't know.
Okay. Oh, this is a fun one. Can you describe your main characters as cocktails?
Oh, I love that. Let's see. I feel, okay, I'm not a huge drinker, so this makes it a little hard. I feel like Derek would be something like bourbon or whiskey, maybe like an old fashioned.
I was gonna say
Kind
that.
of bourbon drink. He's like an old fashioned. I feel like Ren's a shot of something. She's like a shot of vodka, or she is nothing about those cocktails. She's just like downing it. I mean, she definitely like drinks vodka from the bottle at one point in the book. So Adley would be something sweet, but like understated, and like unassuming. I want to say like maybe like an elderflower martini or something. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And then KALYN would be a fun drink. I feel like maybe something like I want to say maybe like like a Jaeger bomb or something.
One of the drinks,
maybe.
Put one drink into another drink and then like chug it.
Yeah, drop it in, go. Like, and he's doing like 5 of those in a row.
Yeah. So accurate. You did good on that. Jeez.
Thank you. Made it off the fly.
It's a great question. I'm going to start asking that.
Yeah, that was a really good question.
Launches.
All right. What did you mean when you said that you wrote 10 to 15,000 words and they were all wrong earlier when you were talking about us starting off?
So it was mostly because of Ren. So when I first started, I kind of had it. I mean, I love morally ambiguous, morally gray characters. So Ren was always going to be like this kind of like firecracker, like morally gray person. But I kind of had it in my head who I thought she was going to be. She was gonna be able to hold her tongue. She was going to be a little less brash. Like she, in the original beginning, she had been like raised elsewhere, and like she kind of was supposed to have been able to like not say everything that comes into her head. But as I was writing and like she was interacting with the other characters, she just like kept trying to say things, and I was like, Ren, like you would not, if like you wouldn't say this, like you would be able to keep your mouth shut. And then I reached a certain point where I was like, this just isn't working. Like Ren's background, her like everything that's happened to her in her life so far, like none of it makes sense for who this person is on the page. So at that point, I was like, okay, I have to start over. I have to write this girl as like she's coming out instead of this idea I had in my head. So I went over and I went back to the beginning and just completely started over. Like Ren was already, because in the beginning, in the first draft, she like didn't already live in Denfell. So Ren was already living in Denfell. She was a pit fighter, and she was like helping run this orphanage boarding house thing. And she just said whatever the hell she wanted to say. And then that really influenced the story and took it in a completely different direction. And that was when it took off.
That's crazy. I can believe you wrote so much and then had to start over. It's my nightmare.
Because I'm really stubborn. And I was like, no, this is going to work. And then I had to eventually admit that it was not going to work.
I just rewrote my book too.
You
like,
rewrite a lot. Like if you think that's bad, KALYN, like LB rewrites her books like 20 times.
Oh my gosh.
Like 3 times.
Okay.
But that's like what I was saying about how Jen's so intentional. Like I'm just like, whatever pops into my head. I know this isn't going to work. I'm just going to fling it at the page. And Jen is just very like, I don't know, like I'm like tossing paint on the canvas and she's like these like very intentional brush strokes. And I'm just really, really jealous of that.
That's a great way to describe it.
It's so slow though. Don't be jealous. It's so slow. It takes me forever.
Ups and downs to both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I like the way this question is phrased. Is this going to be a series or a standalone that breaks us and leaves us wanting more?
So there's definitely room for more in this world. I think anybody who's read it, there are the whole story itself in Of Silver and Shadow is wrapped up to everything. All the threads are kind of, not all the threads, but the big threads are tied off. But there are like little threads still hanging. But like I really hate to disappoint, but it is currently a standalone.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry for breaking you, but I'm really not that sorry because that's the best.
That's what fan fiction is for.
Yeah,
Book
like
breaks
that's
you and
great.
expand the world.
Oh, I love fan fiction. It's the best.
All right, how did you come up with your names, and are any of them named after people in your life?
Second part of the question, no, not named after anyone. The names, I didn't think that hard about the names. Ren, I wanted something that was a little bit more androgynous and that kind of like packed a punch like Ren does. So I wanted kind of her name to like fit who she felt as a character. I have absolutely no idea where Adley came from. She was just Adley. Adley came first, and then her full name, Adelina, I was like, oh, I guess her full name could be Adelina, but she was Adley first. And then KALYN, again, no idea. KALYN and Heath, like I kind of ended up, so I could like have some kind of method to my madness. I ended up making characters who were in the same families have like the same origins. So KALYN and Heath are both Irish, I think, Irish names. Though I did tend to take the names and change like one letter. So KALYN is typically spelled Kellan, and I changed it to an En. And then Derek's, the Hollister family, Derek, his brother Marcus, and their father Lauren, it's all German spellings of like typical names. So I kind of did that with the families, but I really did not think very hard about like finding the perfect names.
That's cool. That's way more thought than I put into mine. I just like, oh, does this sound nice? And then I end up with names that start with R.
I love your names though. Keep doing what you're doing.
I get a like that babynames.com and then like I'm like, okay, I know it, I want it to end with an N and it has to mean this, and then I change it because I write sci-fi, so it has to have like an apostrophe and a letter in it.
All right, what time of day did you tend to write Of Silver and Shadow? Was it a night book, a morning book, or work on it whenever you can book?
It was a night book or an evening book. I wrote it every day after work, like immediately after work for a couple of hours. And it was every day. I say every weekday. I typically did not write on the weekends until the very end when I could see the ending in sight. The last two weekends that I wrote it, I wrote for 3 days, starting Friday when I got off work until Sunday at the end of the day, 13 hours on Saturday and 13 hours on Sunday for 2 weekends in a row, because I was just so close to the ending that I was like, I got to get this out. I got to get here. And it was also the scenes at the end of the book are extremely short and like fast paced, like action packed. So it was like sitting down and writing them helped a lot with like writing them at once helped a lot with the flow and like figuring out the pacing of those scenes. So, but it was definitely a night book.
Sorry, I was gonna sneeze.
How dare you?
Okay, how dare I? I know. Are you working on any new projects?
Well, yes. I'm not gonna give any details. It's not finished. I am determined to get it finished early this year. It's been extremely difficult to write for many reasons, both like personal and the fact that like the book is the hardest thing that I've ever written. It's just been extremely challenging. But it's also, I think, the best thing that I've ever written. I love the concept so much. And I think it's going to be worth the wait. All I'll say is that there is a heist, there is death as a person, and there's a starlit city. That's it. I'm not saying anything else.
I'm so excited about this. Like,
but like, don't hold your breath because you're going to be holding it for years. But I think it'll be worth it when it comes out. Like, I can't wait for that day. Very far off in the future.
Definitely. Okay, I think we've got time for about 2 more questions, which is perfect because we have 2 more questions. If you could write a short story or a novella with a character from Of Silver and Shadow that is not a main character, who would it be and why?
Oh gosh, that's hard. Can I like take all of the side characters and write another one with 4 points of view about them? Like, I would love to write, I think Lessa might be really interesting. She is like Adley's lover in the book, and she is like, I don't know, she's super interesting because she like, again, she's like Adley, where she is the opposition, but she's also you're like sort of rooting for her, but she's the opposite of Adley in that she's like kind of relishes this violence. She's a little sadistic. And I think it'd be really interesting to like explore more of how she got to that point, and how she kind of feels about this role that she's been forced into. I think that could be really interesting. But also, I really would love to write about Marcus. Like, he's just like a sweet little cinnamon roll.
Yeah.
And I would just love it so much. So, just like both of them, and Freya and Holland. Like, can we write about all of them?
A proposal for Lessa and Marcus to end up in a story together and have to work together because, like,
oh God, my mind is already spinning. I love it so much. That book would be so fun.
All right, last one for you. Approximately what kind of time period is your story set in?
Okay, so I definitely mishmashed things, which is what I love about fantasy, is you can kind of do whatever you want as long as it makes sense. It's like a typical medieval setting, and like we've got the castles, you know, there's not guns, we don't have pistols or anything. Don't have, like, at one point I like naturally just wrote in a reference to like cannon fire, and then I realized later, I was like, wait, they don't have cannons in this world. But then I did give them this substance called fragor, which is technically like gunpowder, that you like find in the deserts of T'Chara, which is another kingdom. But then I took inspiration for the clothing from Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I watched that movie. I freaking love the outfits in that movie. Ren's like signature outfit with like her cropped red coat and like her leather corset is based off of Elizabeth in that movie. So I kind of took like that period's clothing. Like I made it medieval but more advanced. Like they have like, there's like some water, like some plumbing in the houses. So I kind of just like pulled things together, and I was just like, we're gonna take this from this and this from this, and we're just gonna make this whole like conglomeration of a world. It's great.
It worked.
Thank you.
All right, well, awesome. I think that's all we have question-wise. Thank you guys all so much for joining us. I'll turn it back over to you.
Wow, go us.